Okay, so let's get started. Welcome to week 9 of Project Performance Management, AI in Project Performance Management. So today we're going to look at how AI is changing the way that project performance is measured, monitored, forecast, and managed. AI can strengthen performance insight, but it doesn't replace the disciplined project management judgment. So in other words, AI is not going to replace the project managers. We still have to be involved and we still have to make judgment. In the MGT6051 class, I did a little longer AI presentation to kind of explain what it's all about, how it works. But PMI has really kind of jumped into this, but really taken a good leadership role as far as AI and project management goes. So if you got your student membership, go out there and see what they've got. They've got a whole bunch of little courses. They're like 30-minute or 40-minute where you can go through and use the AI. And what's nice about it is you get a little badge that you can share on your LinkedIn page, and anything like that, anything with AI in it these days that's on your LinkedIn page is really kind of a good thing, especially if employers are looking for people with AI in their profile. AI is reshaping how projects are measured, forecasted, and governed and led. And so today the presentation is organized around 5 areas. First, we'll look at why AI matters, specifically from the perspective of project performance management. And then second, we'll examine how AI can support measurement, monitoring, and forecasting. And then third, we'll consider risk, ethics, accountability. And since AI supports decisions, it still requires that strong human oversight. And then fourth, we'll discuss how the role of the project manager is evolving as AI takes on more analytical support work. And finally, we'll talk about some of the takeaways. This presentation is meant to fulfill I think it's competency 13 or 14, which is the AI stuff. I haven't really got it completely integrated into everything yet. We just added that this last term, I think, the AI competency. Amberton wants to be known as a school that embraces that. We've got a new AI and applied AI. I think it's a Master of Science. It's either MA or MS in applied AI. And so we're integrating it into the courses. Some professors are a little further along than others. I tend to be one of the more progressive ones when it comes to use of AI in the classroom. I look at it as kind of like the library. It's just that it's here. It's kind of a combination of all the search engines in the library, and it's a research tool as far as I'm concerned. And then in project management, when we get out into the field, we can leverage this. And I think I mentioned in the class, I'm pretty sure I have, that I really think that where we're going, as far as the practice goes, we're going to be able to use these tools, and we'll be able to tailor the project plan and the approach and everything to fit each individual project. So in other words, we'll be able to spin up a project plan using these tools that just fits our project, instead of being like have a PMO that has a bunch of standard templates you have to use, and you have to kind of fit it in. And then we'll be able to define metrics and things like that, and use AI tools to monitor and control and keep track of what's going on. And that gives us information to make better decisions. I personally don't see AI replacing the human part of it as long as there's people involved in the project. We get to the point where everybody's a bot, well, then maybe we have some issues. But I think that's a long way off. I think really what I've been listening to and reading lately is they've kind of hit a ceiling of what they can do with the resources they have. And it's a power and compute problem now. Doesn't mean that won't get solved, but it's slowed it down some. It's still growing, but it slowed it down some. And the emphasis now, at least what I'm seeing, is on the development, compute, using it to write code and stuff. So, but you still have to have someone even then who understands how the system's supposed to work to make sure the code's working well. Same thing with project management, in my view, and there's a judgment piece to it. So anyway, project performance management depends on timely, reliable, actionable information. We've talked about that in this class. The project performance management depends on the project manager's ability to understand how the project is actually performing and what that performance means. It's not enough to simply just collect data and produce reports. The real value comes from turning that project information into insight that helps us make decisions. AI belongs in this part of it because project managers often work with information from many sources. We got schedules, we have budgets, we have dashboards, meeting notes, risk registers, issue logs, change requests, stakeholder communications. And AI can help summarize that information. It can detect patterns and identify possible warning signs and support faster analysis. One of the things that AI is really good at, and that is looking at unstructured data, which is a lot of like meeting notes, risk registers, issue logs, change requests, stakeholder communications, all of that kind of stuff is unstructured data. And AI is really good at taking unstructured data and looking for patterns and trends and things like that. So you say you're on a really big project and you've got several teams all working, you take all of their reports in minutes and have the AI analyze, it might be able to pick up some theme that's happening that maybe could lead to a problem down the road. Certain teams starting to lag a little bit behind, and it can help you identify that cascading effect that happens when you have a bottleneck or something like that. It can really do that. So AI doesn't replace the project manager's role. Like I said, the project manager still has to interpret the information in context. So in other words, they can analyze all this unstructured data, but it's still on to us to make sure it's meaningful, it has meaning. We have to evaluate trade-offs. We have to consider the impact to the stakeholders in the project. We have to decide what action is appropriate. And in that sense, AI can strengthen project performance management because when it supports the professional judgment rather than try to replace it, right? So it can help you make a lot of decisions. And I use it some with I also do assessment work for Amerton, and I will sometimes use AI to evaluate assessment reports. And then it gives me a report, and it's up to me to say, well, that looks good, that doesn't look good. Should I call this instructor? I just don't submit the report without looking at it. And I think I don't know if everybody's heard the stories about the lawyers that are getting in trouble with the courts because they write these briefs using the ChatGPT, and it hallucinates. And the references, especially the courts, they're really big on precedent and all of that. And it's kind of like what we do with APA, right? Citing references, except it has a lot more consequences. And if you cite something that doesn't exist, so you can't trust it. And one of the reasons that currently the AIs hallucinate is that they're prediction engines, and they just it's not like they're making stuff up. They're going back and they're picking up the percentages of what should follow next. And it looks like they're just making stuff up, but they're really not. They're going through and say, well, I get here. Well, I'm just going with what looks like it's supposed to look next. Well, if what's supposed to be there next doesn't exist in real life, it's going to look like a hallucination. That's what it's going to look like. So the AI expands reporting from a record of past performance to a guide for further action. Kind of goes along with what I'm saying. In slide 3, we talked about the basic idea that AI can connect project signals, analysis, and project manager judgment and performance action. We're going to narrow that down here by comparing traditional reporting with AI-assisted performance intelligence, right? Now, traditional reporting is still important. Teams need to acquire status updates, variants, explanations, and documentation of what happened. The information that reports often are periodic and backward looking. So by the time the project manager sees the pattern clearly, the issue may already have affected the schedule, budget, stakeholder confidence, and delivery quality. And that's kind of where I'm going with how AI is good at this unstructured data. It can spot these patterns before there may be something rumbling out there as teams are having their discussions about what they're experiencing. The AI has the ability to tie that together in a way that we can't efficiently. AI-assisted performance intelligence adds more of a forward-looking layer. So take those patterns and then you can extrapolate it to what, well, this is going to cause a problem later. It can help monitor project signals more continuously, summarize patterns across multiple sources, identify weak signals, support what might happen next type of conversations, the what if analysis. And all this matters because project managers are not only responsible for explaining performance, they're responsible for acting early enough to protect project outcomes. So the key point here is that AI doesn't eliminate reporting. It can make reporting more useful by connecting past performance, current patterns, and possible future outcomes. So you can, like I was saying, it's really good at doing that kind of work. AI can strengthen measurement by helping project managers see patterns across scattered project data. Again, the unstructured data. Project measurement is not limited to one dashboard or one report. In real projects, performance information is often scattered across many places: the schedule, cost reports, risk registers, issue logs, change requests, quality records, meeting notes, stakeholder communications, all this stuff. And speaking of stakeholder communications, one of the things that AI is good at too is there's a sentiment analysis. It can go and look at the language that people are using in their feedback, and it can analyze sentiment, and it can say, well, this is a negative, this stakeholder has negative or positive sentiment towards what's going on. Well, they may not really be expressing that explicitly. Implicitly, their language is kind of giving it away, if you will, and AI can pick out those patterns. AI can help project managers work across all those sources effectively. It can summarize large amounts of project information, detect recurring patterns, identify unusual signals, and suggest areas that may need closer review. For example, a schedule delay might look manageable all by itself, but when it appears or when you show it alongside repeated issue log entries raising stakeholder concerns, then you may even show that there's unresolved resource conflicts or other kind of performance issues that looking at the schedule. This is where AI can support stronger measurement. It helps project managers connect indicators that may otherwise remain separate. So, however, the project manager still needs to determine whether those patterns are meaningful, whether the data is accurate, and what follow-up questions are asked. So the important takeaway here is that AI doesn't replace project measurement discipline. It depends on it. The AI needs us to be disciplined about what we're doing. If the project team is not collecting useful data, defining meaningful metrics, and maintaining reliable project artifacts, AI will have very little quality to information to analyze. So it's the old garbage in, garbage out thing. If we're not doing the job of keeping track of things, writing meaningful reports, being disciplined about our work, then when we try to use AI to analyze that for patterns, it's just going to, create useless information, or even errant information. So it's really based on what we give it. AI can improve forecasting speed, but it cannot compensate for weak baselines or unreliable project data. Again, back to that. Earned value management already gives us a disciplined way to integrate scope, schedule, and cost performance. The core idea is that planned value, earned value, and actual cost can be compared to show whether the project is ahead of schedule or behind schedule or over or under budget. And so the talk we had on earned value management in the cost management part of it emphasizes all that. And earned value management integrates scope, schedule, and cost information so that we can understand project performance and how it's progressing. Well, AI can add value here by helping us analyze those patterns faster. It may help identify which work packages are driving the variance, summarize cost and schedule trends, compare possible scenarios to support and estimate at completion type discussions. And AI is not going to replace earned value. It's going to build on that earned value discipline already exists, and it allows us to optimize the project metrics tracking and performance. So this is important. AI forecasting, again, is only as good as the data and assumptions behind it. If the baseline is weak, if progress is reported inconsistently, if actual costs are incomplete, if earned value rules are unclear, the AI may simply produce a faster but still unreliable forecast. And that's why the project manager remains responsible for validating the data and interpreting forecasts and deciding what corrective action is needed. I was reading an article this week from I forget the name of the company, but it's like a startup company, and they're doing software development, and they're using Claude, I think it's Claude AI, to actually write code. And what they found is that they have to be really good at defining the requirements, or that they don't get good results. And this is what this is saying, that we have to, we really want to make sure we can use AI to create our project plan, but we want to make sure it's a really good, meaningful plan. We can use AI to analyze trends during execution and performance, but we got to make sure that we're entering the right data and that we're being disciplined about what we're doing. So it's some of the things that we've kind of gotten lazy about, especially in the agile movement. It was kind of like, well, let's just talk to the stakeholder and throw something together and show them this. You can still do that, but if you don't maybe have a better conversation to be able to instruct the AI what to build, then you're not going to get good results. You're not going to get better results than you would otherwise. So we've got to get better or be better at tracking things and keeping the plans, be better at defining work packages. A lot of times work packages are a source of scope creep. We have a work package in the schedule that we're trying to, we want to try to get done, and we get close and we're like 90% there. And if we make this one change, and before you know it, we've put in a bunch of unauthorized changes, when that work package is behind schedule or over budget, and it throws off everything. Well, AI can probably pick up when you're doing that making those changes if you're recording the work and stuff as it goes along. So it's a powerful tool. AI can help project managers detect schedule risk before delays become visible in formal reports, so it can analyze the complexities. In schedules, there's a lot of dependencies, predecessor, successor type logic. You can look at that. The schedule performance is one of the most visible parts of project performance management, because missed dates can quickly affect our cost, stakeholder confidence, resource use, and delivery expectations. So traditional schedule reporting often identifies delays after they started to affect the project. AI can support schedule performance management by help detect early warning signs. Like I was talking about, the work package that just kind of grows mysteriously across multiple sources. For example, task updates may be late, dependency handoffs may be slipping, resources may be overloaded, issue logs may show reoccurring blockers. Individually, these signals may appear minor, but when they're put together, they suggest that the project schedule is beginning to weaken or starting to get slow. So this is where AI can help project managers see these emerging patterns easier. It can support trend detection, dependency risk analysis, resource bottlenecks identification, and scenario comparisons. However, the project manager still decides what the pattern means and what the appropriate response is. And the response may involve resequencing work, escalating a dependency issue, adjusting the responses, negotiating scope and schedule trade-offs, or communicating realistic forecasts to stakeholders. AI can help identify where attention is needed, but the project manager remains responsible for schedule, judgment, and the action that we're going to take. So far, AI is not going to do that. So there's a term in all this AI stuff. It's called the human in the loop in the whole AI decision process. You hear it a lot when they talk about autonomous weapons, right? They don't want to just give the AI the ability to go out and, take extreme action. They want to keep a human in the loop. Same kind of philosophy here. The project manager is a human in the loop when it comes to actually making decisions and the judgment of what to do. So AI can help project managers surface uncertainty earlier, but uncertainty still remains a human judgment. Project uncertainty is not limited to risk already listed in the risk register. It also includes ambiguity, complexity, volatility, and unexpected conditions that emerge as the project moves forward. So my notes The instructor notes on uncertainty emphasize that projects are inherently complex and unpredictable, and the project managers need to recognize and manage uncertainty to support project success. So this navigating, I've never really personally liked the term managing uncertainty, because you can't manage it, it's uncertain. You can help guide uncertainty or adapt to uncertainty. A lot, there's ways to do it, but the idea is the management of the reaction to uncertainty, you can certainly do. Okay. So AI can help by reviewing large amounts of project information and identifying patterns, again, like I was saying, that may suggest emerging uncertainty. For example, an AI may help detect recurring issue types or repeated schedule problems or stakeholder sentiment shifts, resource strain, vendor performance concerns, or risks that appeared in similar past projects. So it can look at patterns and compare across. However, AI doesn't fully understand the project environment in a way that the project manager does and the project team does. It may identify a possible risk, but the project manager still should evaluate whether the signal that the risk is giving us is meaningful, and how likely the risk is, and what impact it could have, and what response is appropriate. And the key point here is that AI can expand the project manager's field of vision, if you will, on the project, and it can help surface potential threats and opportunities earlier. But the responsibility for judgment, prioritization, stakeholder communication, and response planning remains with the project manager. Once the risk and uncertainty are identified, the next challenge is communications. So AI may help project managers summarize and tailor information, but shareholder trust still depends on how that information is interpreted and shared. So AI can help project managers communicate faster, but trust still depends on accuracy, transparency, and judgment. So once risk, uncertainty, and performance goals are identified, the project manager still has to communicate that information effectively. Project performance management depends not only on measuring performance, but also on helping stakeholders understand what the information means and what action may be involved. So AI can support this communication work by summarizing meeting notes, drafting status updates, and translating technical information into effective language, identifying key themes and stakeholder feedback, or creating different message versions for different stakeholder groups. This can reduce administrative effort and help the project manager respond more quickly. But communication is not simply a writing task or reporting task. The project manager must review AI-generated communication for accuracy, tone, sensitivity, confidentiality, and stakeholder impact. One thing that I found, if I use AI to help me with emails, and it's always much more formal than I want it to be. And then even if I tell it to kind of be friendly, then it starts getting too many adjectives, too many superfluous kind of words in there. It gets too fruity, if you will. And so you don't want to send, make sure that it's consistent. It's not too formal. It's not too casual. It's professional to the context or to the culture, the environment in. So want to make sure that, a message about a schedule delay, a cost concern, risk exposure, or performance problem can affect trust. So again, the tone, the way that it's written can affect trust. If the errors are in it, you don't want to, it's like these lawyers I'm talking about. Now the courts don't trust them, right? They don't trust the lawyers because they pass that on to the court. If the message is incomplete, misleading, overly optimistic, or poorly timed, it can damage stakeholder confidence. The key point here is that AI can help produce a communication, but the project manager remains responsible for meaning, credibility, and trust. So stakeholder communication still requires that professional judgment. We haven't quite gotten there yet where we can turn it loose. AI can reduce administrative burden, so project managers can spend more time leading performance. This is one of the areas where I think that AI is really going to help. And so a project manager that may just be managing one project at a time in the past could maybe do 2 or 3, or maybe make them much shorter because they're not having to deal with, we can offload a lot of that cognitive time that we spend doing administrative work onto the AI and then focus on actual project performance. So a practical way AI affects project performance management is by reducing the amount of time that project managers spend on administration work. The project managers often have to spend a significant time preparing meeting notes, drafting status reports, updating action items, reviewing documents, summarizing risk, translating technical information into stakeholder-ready communication. AI can help with many of those first draft and summarization tasks. It can organize information, compare documents, create draft updates, summarize stakeholder feedback, and help prepare communication materials. This can make the project manager more efficient. So it's going to give you some time back. But the value is not simply in doing work faster. The real value is freeing the project manager to spend more time on the work that requires human judgment. Interpreting performance, leading the team, resolving issues, engaging stakeholders, managing conflict, and making decisions. So those are all kind of areas where the PMI refers to those as power skills. We used to call them soft skills, like negotiation, communication, because they're not the hard scientific kind of things. Well, what we're finding is that they're, in the age of AI, they're probably more important to project success than those hard skills are, because we can automate a lot of the hard skill stuff. So now we can spend time on the more power skills things. The caution here is that AI generated work still needs review. Faster output is not useful if it's inaccurate, incomplete, or disconnected from the project context. AI can support productivity, but the project manager remains accountable for the quality and usefulness of the final work. So we're still accountable. We haven't quite got there yet. Let AI be accountable for things. AI can improve performance insight, but over-reliance can create new risk to accuracy, fairness, privacy, and accountability. As useful as AI can be for project performance management, it also introduces some new risk. And AI-generated outputs can be incomplete, inaccurate, or based on assumptions that are not visible to the project team. AI can, if the project manager accepts AI-generated summaries, forecasts, or recommendations without review, the project may move faster, but in the wrong direction. So we want to make sure, in other words, we got to be in the middle of this thing and make sure that what's coming out of the AI is what we want to communicate to the rest of the project stakeholders in the context. The quality of AI-supported analysis depends heavily on the quality of the underlying project data. Going back to what I was talking about, what they're finding out with these coding applications is they got to get really good at defining the requirements, which is kind of a throwback to the old days when we used to sit down and write up business requirements documents, and the business analysts would put together use cases and they would map out all the different, there's a successful path and there's all these different ways that you can use the software. It's similar, the project management is similar in that we've got to make sure that our plans, our communications, all that stuff are pretty well defined. But the good thing about that is we can use AI to help us to define those and do that much better, get much better results. I don't know if any of you tried this or not, but go out to Infinity and just say, hey, I need a project charter template. And it'll give you a really good quality project charter template. And and I've tried this in a couple of classes where you give you a little project scenario, and I go to Infinity and say, tell me what approach we should use and draft a template. And it'll analyze all of the requirements. I'll feed it 4 or 5 pages of stuff, and it'll analyze all that, and it'll come back and say, oh, well, this should be a hybrid project, and this part of it should be adaptive, and this part of it should be predictive, and here's, your team agreements, and it does all that in about, 30 seconds to a minute, where if I was doing that myself, it would probably take a week of reading all this stuff and coming up to a determination. Now, what you need to do is once it gives you that, you need to go back and do a little quality check, validate it against the documentation that you gave it and make sure it didn't add anything you didn't intend or didn't omit something that needs to be there. But you're comparing results there instead of building results, which is a much more useful activity comparison than going through and doing all the clerical work to document the plan, to build the charter and things like that. So there's, it's important. So the AI, in that sense, AI doesn't remove the need for sophisticated project controls. It increases the need for them, like I was saying. So really, we're kind of taking a step back a little bit, spending more time up front than maybe we would have had in the past. There's also ethical and governance concerns with AI. AI might expose confidential project information if used carelessly. It may reinforce bias in stakeholder analysis, resource decisions, or performance assessment. It may also create accountability problems if the team begins to rely on what the tool said instead of a clear professional judgment. The main point is that AI should be treated as decision support, not automatic truth. Project managers should validate the outputs, protect sensitive information, assess fairness, and remain accountable for financial decisions. Another area of governance that came up here with something that I was working on, the company I was working with, I was building a course for them, so I was doing. They don't want me to use any of publicly available AI tools because right now there's no copyright protection. So they don't want to put their intellectual property into an AI. They've got some stuff that they have that's where it stays in their system. So we have this issue now of maybe unknowingly transmitting intellectual property of our organizations onto these tools. So we have to be careful about that because they'll take that and I think the exposure risk there is low because it's more of a risk of consumption. In other words, the AI is just going to consume all that stuff up, and then it's going to, as it uses it for training, that information is going to get distributed broadly out to people. So I think it's unlikely that one individual is going to get to all your IP, but it could be spread out, and somebody that's really sharp could probably trace it back to you. So that's another concern that, until I started working with this company, I'd never really considered that these publicly available, like ChatGPT, they're pro and they're in all of them right now, unless your company's gone and bought an exclusive subscription or an exclusive installation of it, you're sharing whatever you put in there with the rest of the world, inadvertently. So that's another risk that we need to think about. AI-supported project decisions still require ethical leadership. AI-supported project performance management creates an important ethical responsibility for the project manager. When AI is used to summarize performance, identify risk, evaluate stakeholder or support forecast, the project manager still needs to remain responsible for the quality and consequences of that work and the consequences of the decision. This connects directly to the ethical principles that we talked about in the first class, and of the project management depends on integrity, respect for people, social responsibility, fairness, and professionalism. Those principles still apply when AI is involved. We just don't throw them out. In fact, they actually become more important because AI can influence decisions about reporting, resources, risk, stakeholders, and performance interpretation. And AI has no moral background, right? Has no ethical. It's just a machine. So it has no moral. So we have to bring that to that. And I mean, if they ever get to, the AI global artificial, what's it called? The sentient type of AI. And even then, what kind of morals is it if the sentient AI is going to have? I don't know if the guy that does the AI stuff here, I've had a conversation with him here, Dr. Sinclair. I had an interesting conversation with him the other day, and he was talking about that what's the potential of them actually developing an AI that is sentient, that, just like us. He's like, well, he doesn't believe that we'll ever be able to do that because we, humans, created AI. And it's not, and his analogy is that all throughout history, we've all been societies, all different people from everywhere, always trying to replace God. And we haven't been able to do it, right? And probably we never will. And we have that same relationship kind of with AI, if you think about it. And it's an interesting way I hadn't really framed it that way until they mentioned it. It's a real philosophical thing, but I've been kind of letting it percolate in my brain a little bit. And it kind of goes back to this ethics question, the moral question, and the AI's morality is going to have to come from us. We have to bring that to the scene. So it's interesting. But a practical way to approach AI ethics is to pause before sharing AI supported output and ask several questions. Is the project data appropriate to use? Is confidential information protected? Could the output unfairly affect a person or a stakeholder group? Can the recommendation be explained? Are limitations clear? And who is accountable for the final decision? The key point in this slide is that AI can assist with analysis, but ethical responsibility can't be delegated to the AI tool. The project manager remains responsible for judgment, transparency, fairness, and accountable action. So, and there's a personality on ChatGPT that's kind of snarky. I can't think of the name of it now. And I use that as the personality, and you use it all day long. You kind of get the feeling there's somebody sitting in the room with you, and it's real easy to kind of fall in this trap where you trust it too much, because it's always wanting it's like having a friend there that never gets mad at you. You know what I'm saying? This personality kind of is sarcastic, so that kind of helps keep you, aligned, right? But it can be easy to kind of trust it too much, and we don't want to do that with AI. What AI doesn't replace? Well, AI can assist project management work, but it doesn't replace the project management accountability. So at this point in the presentation, it's important to make this boundary clear. AI can support project performance management in a lot of useful ways. It can help summarize information, detect patterns, draft communication, support forecasting, identify possible risk or threats. It can handle a lot of the administrative stuff that we do, make life a lot easier for us, but it doesn't replace responsibilities that make project management a profession. It doesn't replace judgment, leadership, ethics, accountability, stakeholder trust, conflict management, or the ability to understand context. This distinction matters because project performance management is not only technical analysis, it's also the work of deciding what matters, communicating honestly, leading people, balancing trade-offs, protecting value, and taking responsibility for action. The project manager remains accountable for the project management decisions made with AI support, and the tool may assist work, but the professional remains responsible for the outcome. So it doesn't replace us. And I don't think we have enough energy in the solar system to build a system that can. That's the Cardiff scale. Have you heard of that? Where they have like a level 1 society and a level 3 society. One of them, the level 3 society, I think, civilization, it can capture all the power that its sun generates. And we're probably millions of years away from that. So I don't think it's anything we have to worry about, so at this point. But AI shifts the project manager's role towards interpretation, integration, judgment, and value-focused action. AI changes the work of the project manager, but it doesn't make the project manager less important. Instead, it shifts emphasis of the role. AI becomes better at summarizing data, drafting reports, identifying patterns, and supporting forecasts. The project manager's value increasingly comes from interpreting what that information means. The future project manager, and I think the future is now, will need to ask better questions, validate AI-supported outputs, integrate information across performance areas, make decisions reflect context, ethics, stakeholder needs, and value delivery. And this connects directly to the broader direction of project management, where the focus is not only on producing outputs, but supporting outcomes that deliver value for stakeholders, right? It goes all the way back to where we can have a project that looks really good on paper, but if it's not delivering value, then it's not really a success. When there's plenty of examples where projects have been just terrible. The big opera house in Sydney, Australia, is one of them. It went on, it was supposed to be like a 3 or 4 year project. And it turned out to take almost 20 years to build. They went through, half a dozen different project managers, but the value that it's delivered to humans in general has been, now we kind of look back on it and think, well, that's worth it. So even though from a project management perspective, it was a pretty sloppy project, it was a failure in those terms, but as far as the value delivery. And so we're still responsible for that. And so far as I know, AI cannot determine what's value is. It's not something it can define. We're all really put about understanding what's value is, because value to me is different than value to you. But when we aggregate all of our values together, we come up with something like the communal or societal value. So there's different layers there. So we got to know that context of the stakeholders. What's the value to our stakeholders? We got to know that context. And that's where the project management comes in. So in practical terms, the project manager becomes less of a collector of information and more of an interpreter of performance, less of a report producer and more of a decision facilitator, less of a software tool user, like a scheduling tool or something like that, and more of a responsible technology governor. An important takeaway is that AI does not reduce the need for project management skill. It raises the importance of professional judgment, leadership, ethical decision-making, and the ability to turn performance into responsible action. So with that in mind, we can close this presentation out by bringing discussion back to the main theme. AI will not make project performance less important. It'll make disciplined performance management even more meaningful. So I think that, like this slide kind of referred to, is that it's just going to amplify what we're doing. And we've been trying, a lot of us faculty have been trying to integrate more AI stuff into our classes. And I was around when they first came out with calculators in the classroom. And it was like, schools were like, no, no way. But eventually they're in the classroom. I even worked for a company that developed, I worked for TI that did that. And what we found out is that we could do a lot more work, a lot more, the algebra. Instead of spending all our time doing arithmetic, we could focus on the algebra and the calculus, the rules and things that went in there and actually do more meaningful work. I even go back to when I first started working, and this is kind of technology in general. What technology tends to do, and think about the telephone a little bit. When they first came out with the telephone back in the early 1900s, you had to have a direct wired connection from where you were at back to the central office. And at the time, you could pick up the phone, it would make a connection, and somebody in the central office an operator would pick up the phone and ask you where you wanted to call. And if you wanted to call locally, they could look up and see if there was like a little cord that was plugged in a jack. And they say, well, that line's busy. Well, if not, they could go up and put in there, and then they would actually have to crank a ringer to ring the phone. And then they pick it up, and then the operator could pull themselves off of they had a bridging circuit, pull themselves off the circuit. Well, that went to all the way to cell phones, where now all of that kind of work of dialing and connecting, and that's all done by you. It's all done on the phone, right? So that's how the technology tends to work. It tends to push most of the labor, if you will, to the edge. And that's kind of what AI is doing here, is pushing the work out to the edge. And so we can do more of it. When I was first learning to write software, as I mentioned, we had to actually write stuff out on a coding form. It was you buy these sheets of paper, and it had it had like 130 columns across the top and 66 columns, rows down the bottom, and it had, like, it was COBOL at the time, and so you had a structure that you had to put it in, and then you'd have to take it to someone, and they would have to punch it all up into cards, and then they would put it in a batch and run it overnight. Well, and I took a class, and I was at Texas Tech at the time, and it took us a whole semester to write one program to just average 10 grades, average 10 numbers. That was all the software did, was create an average. Well, the next couple of semesters later, they came out with the virtual screens, tubes that you could type stuff in. Now the editors were still bad, but you could sit there and type your code in. Well, we did like 3 programs that time. One of them was the Celsius to Fahrenheit converter, and another one was to calculate what day of the week it would be on a certain day in 2030 or back in the history. You could do the count, calculate. You have to take account for the leap years and all that kind of stuff. And then a few years later, they came out with what they call integrated development environments, where you could run iterations. And then we were doing, like, by the time I was taking those classes, we were doing maybe a program every week, or a couple every week. And so we've seen that kind of happen with AI. That type of, it's more of a ability to leverage technology for productivity. And so it automates a lot of work, but it also gives us capabilities to do work ourselves that we would have normally maybe had to do with others, or as a group, or as a team, or even rely on a professional to do. So a big chunk of my career was going into companies that were having trouble with their projects in general, help them put together a PMO, that kind of consulting work. Well, now you could load your information into an AI and ask it to look for patterns, and you can do a lot of that kind of questions that I would get paid a lot of money to ask. And they were pretty much the same questions everywhere I went. Just repeat, wash, rinse. That's how consultants work. They have one thing they do, and they just do it. They do it really well, and they just do it over and over at different clients. Well, nowadays, that kind of stuff you can do in-house. So it pushes that kind of reliance on expertise out to the edge, out to us, out to the individual user, and that kind of stuff. And that's how technology tends to evolve. And AI is no different. So this slide here says, AI won't make project performance management less important, but it makes discipline performance management more important. Again, it goes back to what I'm hearing the software guys say. We got to get really good at nailing these requirements down before we use the AI. So we got to get really good at the information that we collect, or that our teams report on, get really good at defining scope, get really good at breaking down scope, in order to use these tools. So as we close this up, the main point is AI doesn't reduce the importance of project performance management. In many ways, it kind of raises the standard. It's raising the bar a little bit. If AI is used to help analyze project information, then the quality of that analysis depends on the quality of the project data, the clarity of the baseline, the strength of the metrics, and the discipline of the project management process. So I think this is where you guys, as I've said a lot of times, I really commend you guys for being here on Saturday and being in this class. It's just awesome. It's not lost on me or Amberton, by the way. But what you're learning here is you're learning how to assist processes. You might not realize it now, but someday you're going to be sitting in a classroom. You're going to say, hey, that crazy professor of mine, that Darnell guy, he talked about this. And you're going to get it. Where other people who don't make this commitment that you're making are not going to have that background. And so sometimes you get a lot of this, well, I don't need the theory, I just need to work. Well, if you don't have a grounding in the theory, you don't know how to ask the right questions to do the work. Now, you may gain that over experience, but you guys are all going to be ahead of someone that doesn't have that experience. That's where you're going to be at. AI can help us see patterns faster, generate summaries, support forecasts, identify possible risk or performance issues, but it doesn't remove the need for professional judgment. Project managers still need to decide whether the information is reliable, whether the pattern is meaningful, and whether the recommendation is ethical, and what action is appropriate for the context that we're in. The future of project management is not simply about using these tools. It's about combining reliable data, project data, responsible interpretation, and accountable action. That combination is what turns information into insight, into performance insight, and performance insight into bigger project outcomes or better project outcomes. And so the key takeaway for this is that AI strengthens the project manager's ability to manage performance, but only when it's used with a disciplined transparency and ethical judgment, and a clear focus on value delivery. So again, AI is a great tool, but it requires a new kind of discipline. So again, this is the end of this. AI can improve the speed and the depth of our performance management, but its value depends on us, value judgment, good data. And so we're still accountable and responsible for that data. So that is the end of that. You guys have any questions? How many of y'all have been using AI in your work?